Twisted Metal 2 is turning 25. Releasing on the Sony PlayStation in 1996, it became a cornerstone for the groundbreaking console. Its ultraviolent car combat was burned into the memories of a generation of gamers who were drawn into this chaotic world through cutting-edge gameplay and storytelling. It did so well, in fact, that it spawned its own genre, one where its competitors and sequels alike would struggle to replicate the success of the second game for years, all the way up until Twisted Metal Black released about half a decade later. So what made Twisted Metal 2 Sony's lightning in a bottle? How did it get things so right that it's still remembered fondly to this day, even as its sequels and copycats, with every opportunity to improve the formula, faded into obscurity? I'm Josh Jackson, and today we're talking about what made Twisted Metal 2 the king of car combat: the gameplay. The original Twisted Metal set a solid foundation by taking the concept of games like Destruction Derby, where players destroyed enemy vehicles with collisions in an arena-based environment, then adding weapons and setting the cars loose in an abandoned Los Angeles. It took the concept to new heights. Each car would have a unique weapon that built up over time, while generic weapons like missiles could be picked up throughout the city. Twisted Metal 2 amped up the insanity by introducing advanced attacks, moves that could be used by any car by entering Street Fighter-esque button inputs at the cost of a slowly charging meter. Having access to items like napalm when you were low on ammo, or freeze attacks to hold a fleeing opponent in place was a real game changer. Top that off with the new characters and some unbelievable new special moves, Mr. Slam's Slam and Grab being an especially awesome example, and you have a game that built heavily on the original's concept: the characters. Speaking of the characters, Twisted Metal 2 was packed with memorable personalities that came to life through both their motivations and their distinct vehicles. Gritty, edgy characters like the series' mascot Sweet Tooth were very much a product of the time, but others gave the game an insane amount of variety. From the race car Twister, to the motorcycle Mr. Grimm, to monster trucks, tanks, and a pink lowrider. You could learn so much about both the playstyle and the driver behind the wheel just from looking at them and their cars. It was further emphasized by the drivers, who had fully voiced characters and introductions, explaining why they were risking their lives for this ultimate prize. For example, Outlaw 2 is an LAPD officer and the sister of the previous game's winner, who was looking for him after he had disappeared in the previous ending. Mr. Slam is a disgruntled construction worker who wants to build the world's largest tower. Roadkill is a schizophrenic homeless man who seems to be the only one who knows this is a video game. While the characters can be wildly unbalanced gameplay-wise, their backgrounds are always enough to push through in order to see how their meeting with Calypso would turn out. The stages. By expanding the setting to a worldwide stage, it gave Twisted Metal 2 a much larger toy box to play in. The environment variety was massive, allowing us to destroy landmarks all around the world on maps that each felt distinct. In a time where environmental damage was far from common, these arenas awarded experimentation by ramping up the destruction. If you can see something, you can probably blow it up. It was often at the detriment of trying to win, but I'll never forget dumping a bunch of missiles into a blimp in the distance, or working together with my opponents to blow up the Eiffel Tower. The ensuing destruction would often open up new paths and access to stronger equipment, adding a layer of exploration to a combat-focused game. The multiplayer. While limited by a 2-player cap, Twisted Metal 2 was still a blast to play with friends. The game was far from fair, with certain cars being clearly positioned above others. But it didn't matter. The tense exhilaration of trying to outplay your opponent by using the quirks of your character and the stage to your advantage is one of my fondest PS1 memories. As a series first, Twisted Metal 2 also included a co-op campaign. This made the story mode a little bit more fair, as you now had the army of CPU cars targeting 2 players instead of 1. Teaming up was a nice change of pace, but doing so cheated players out of the game's excellent ending cinematics, which may have been the most memorable part of the game: the story. The Twisted Metal franchise revolves around Calypso, a powerful man whose daughter died in a car crash. He sells his soul for the power to grant wishes, while being tasked with supplying the underworld with more souls through the tournament. Feeling both rage and grief over the loss of his daughter, he started the tournament as a form of revenge, as well as to satisfy his own sadistic tendencies. Originally, the game planned on telling his story through live-action cutscenes, a flex of the time, as full-motion video was considered cutting-edge. Unfortunately, or fortunately depending on who you ask, that didn't work out, so the first game was left with boring stills and scrolling text. Twisted Metal 2 took a completely different approach, adopting a comic book style reminiscent of popular 90s series like Danger Girl, and in the process, Calypso got his own massive makeover. Gone was the carrot top looking guy with the face that looked like a thumbprint. Now he was more human, but became much more sinister in the process. Calypso was usually fair and granted straightforward wishes in the first game, with the only notable exception being the canon winner, Outlaw. However, the second game morphed him into a charismatic, fourth wall breaking monster who would usually use dark humor as he screwed over your chosen character by twisting the wordings of their wishes, usually leading to their deaths. Part of the appeal of playing through the story mode repeatedly was to find out if your character would get what they wished for, how they would be screwed over, or if they would somehow be able to lash out at the man himself. The results rarely disappointed, going from something like this to this, leaving us with scenes that stick with us to this day. Ranging from violent to mind-bending or downright scary, we couldn't wait to load up each campaign in the years before YouTube. And at the center of it all was one of the most charismatic villains of the era. Twisted Metal 2 is unique because it released at a time where 3D gaming and storytelling were in their infancy. While the first game set it up for success, the sequel capitalized in almost every way. From the expanded roster to the improved narrative and visual style, destructible environments and strong multiplayer support, it's easy to see why future games struggle to live up to its success. In the pantheon of PlayStation classics, Twisted Metal 2 stands out as an early example of how to emphasize story-driven progression without sacrificing what made it exciting to play. While largely dormant today, the franchise remains popular in crossovers, collections, and retrospectives, showing the lasting impression the series left behind. And we have the second game to thank for blasting it into superstardom.